The heel of her shoe caught on the marble the exact moment Marco Vitali looked up from his desk, and Josephine Callahan felt the entire lobby of the 52nd floor go quiet around her like the building itself had decided to listen. She caught herself on the edge of the reception counter. Nobody laughed. Nobody in this office ever laughed at anything, which she had learned in her first week, and which still unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She straightened, smoothed the front of the purple dress she had bought on clearance 8 months ago for a wedding that got canceled, and walked the rest of the way to his door like her ankle had not just betrayed her in front of the most dangerous man in the borough. She had taken this job because the pay was absurd and the hours were reasonable, and the recruiter had described the position as private secretary to a real estate executive without once using the word family or the word commission. She had been an administrative assistant for 6 years. She knew how to manage calendars, screen calls, keep a room running smoothly even when the man behind the desk was clearly furious about something he would not name. What she had not known, what nobody had told her until her 3rd week when she overheard 2 men in dark suits use the word borgata like it was a job title, was that Marco Vitali did not sell real estate so much as he owned the men who did. By then she had already memorized his coffee order, his allergies, the names of his mother and his 2 surviving brothers, and the particular silence that meant, "Do not knock right now." Leaving would have meant admitting she had built a life around a man whose actual business she still did not fully understand. Staying meant she understood something about herself that she had not examined too closely. She was good at this job. She was good at him. He set down his pen without looking away from her. Marco had a habit of using stillness the way other men used volume. His suit was black, cut close, no logo anywhere on it. The kind of tailoring that cost more than her rent and said nothing about itself. A watch on his left wrist, old, gold, scratched in a way that meant it had survived something. His eyes were the color of wet slate, and they did not move off her as she crossed to the credenza to set down the folder she had brought in. "That dress," he said. His voice carried no inflection she could read. Josephine had spent 4 months learning the man's silences the way other people learned languages, and she still could not translate this one. "Sir?" "Do not wear it again." She turned. She had expected him to be looking at his monitor by now, already 3 sentences into the next thing, but he was still watching her, hands flat on the desk, and something in his jaw had gone tight in a way she associated with the men who came to see him and left 10 minutes later looking gray. "Is there a dress code I missed?" she said. It came out steadier than she felt. "There is a dress code," he said. "It applies to you specifically, as of right now." She had 2 responses available to her. The first was to apologize and mean it, the way she had learned to apologize to men who signed her paycheck. The second was the one that actually left her mouth. "I bought this dress for a wedding that got called off. It's the only formal thing I own that isn't black. I wasn't aware my wardrobe was under executive review." Something moved behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. He picked his pen back up. "Noted," he said, in a tone that closed the subject the way a door closes on a draft, and she left his office telling herself it was nothing, a passing irritation from a man who was irritated by most things, and she believed that for exactly 11 hours. She was still turning the exchange over that night when the messages started coming in from Renata, who ran the front desk on the ground floor and who Josephine had befriended over shared elevator rides and a mutual understanding that neither of them would ask the other too many questions about the men who worked upstairs. Renata's first text said only, "Did you hear about Tommy D?" The second, sent 4 minutes later, said, "Don't come in tomorrow through the main lobby. Use the side entrance. I'll explain when I see you." Josephine read both twice, sitting cross-legged on her second-hand couch in an apartment 2 train transfers from the office, and felt the particular chill of being told something was wrong without being told what. She called. Renata picked up on the first ring and spoke fast, the way people spoke when they had already decided to tell you something they probably shouldn't. Tommy DeSalvo, a soldier who reported to one of Vitali's capos, had been found dead in his car in a parking structure 2 blocks from the office. Word downstairs was that DeSalvo had been skimming, and that his cousin, a man named Ray Farrell, who ran muscle for a rival crew out of Jersey, had been the one to find out first, and had been using that information as leverage against the Vitali organization for weeks before anyone caught it. DeSalvo's death had closed one problem. It had not closed Farrell. "Why does this matter to me?" Josephine asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer and did not want it confirmed. "Because Farrell's been asking around about who's close to Vitali," Renata said. "Not family close, office close. Somebody who sees his calendar, knows his schedule, knows who he's meeting and when. That's you, Josie. You're the only one who has that." Josephine sat with the phone against her ear for a long moment, listening to the hum of her own refrigerator, and understood with total clarity that she had walked into a job interview 8 months ago believing she was applying to manage a calendar, and had instead applied to become, without ever agreeing to it, a target. She did not sleep well. She went in the next morning through the side entrance as instructed, and found Marco waiting for her in the small vestibule off the loading dock, which he had never once done in 8 months, and which told her more than anything Renata had said the night before. "You heard," he said, not a question. "I heard someone named Tommy is dead, and someone named Ray Farrell might be interested in my calendar," she said. "I'd like more than that if it's all the same to you." He studied her the way he studied men across a negotiating table, weighing what she could handle against what she needed to know. Then, apparently, he decided. "Farrell runs a crew that wants my territory," he said, and gestured for her to follow him toward the freight elevator instead of the main bank, another break from routine that made the hair on her arms rise. DeSalvo was feeding him information. DeSalvo is no longer a problem. Farrell believes he can replace that information source with you. "Because I'm close to you." "Because you have access," he corrected, and something in the precision of that correction stung more than she expected. "Access is not closeness. Farrell does not know the difference. He will try to find out." "How?" "That is what I intend to prevent." The elevator doors closed. In the narrow steel box, close enough that she could smell cedar and something darker underneath it, tobacco maybe, or gun oil, he told her the new rules without asking whether she agreed to them. She would not leave the building alone. She would not use her personal car, which was already parked 3 blocks from where Farrell's people might expect it, but which Marco informed her, without apology, that he already had moved. She would sit in a different chair at her own desk, angled away from the hallway camera's blind spot. She listened to every instruction with her spine straight and her jaw tight, furious at the presumption, and unable to argue with a single piece of the logic. "You could have asked," she said when the doors opened onto the 52nd floor. "I am asking now," he said, which was not remotely true, and they both knew it. And for reasons she did not examine too closely, she did not correct him again. The next several days reorganized themselves around a threat she could not see. A driver named Dominic began waiting for her outside her building each morning, a broad, quiet man who called her Miss Callahan and never explained anything beyond the destination. Her desk moved 15 feet to the left. Marco began stopping by more often than the job required, always with a folder he did not need her to see, always finding some reason to stand near enough that she noticed the particular quiet way he moved, like a man who had spent years learning to take up less space than his size would suggest. She noticed things about him she had not let herself notice before. The way he never fully turned his back to a doorway, the scar along his left knuckle, thin and old, that he rubbed without seeming to know he was doing it whenever a conversation turned toward his younger brother, whose photograph sat in a silver frame on the credenza, and whose name, she had learned from Renata months ago and never brought up, was Dante, dead 11 years now in circumstances nobody discussed above a whisper. On Thursday, 4 days into the new arrangement, she stayed late, finishing a set of documents he needed for a Friday meeting he had described only as a sit-down, his voice flattening around the words in a way that told her not to ask what that meant. The office had emptied by 8. She was alone at her desk when she heard the elevator open, and her whole body went rigid before she registered that it was Marco, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the forearm, tie loosened in a way she had never once seen on him. "You should have gone home hours ago," he said. "I wanted to finish the file." He came to stand near her desk, close enough that she had to tilt her head back slightly to hold his gaze, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. The building hummed around them, the particular emptiness of a floor with no one else on it, and she was aware of her own pulse in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Josephine," he said, and it was the first time he had used her full first name instead of Miss Callahan, and something in the way he shaped it, slow, deliberate, like he was testing the weight of it in his mouth, made her stomach drop in a manner that had nothing to do with Ray Farrell. "You've never called me that before," she said. "No," he agreed, and did not explain further, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was the loudest thing in the room. She should have looked away first. She did not. He was the one who broke it, stepping back, reaching for the folder on her desk with a hand that was not quite as steady as it should have been for a man who prided himself on stillness. "Go home," he said. "Dominic is downstairs." She went, because there was nothing else to do with a moment like that except carry it home with her and turn it over for hours in the dark, wondering what exactly had just happened, and whether she had imagined the way his eyes had dropped, briefly, to her mouth, before he remembered himself. Friday's meeting happened in a private room at a restaurant in an unmarked corner of the neighborhood everyone in the building called the Old Quarter, without further explanation. Josephine had not been invited, had in fact been told explicitly to stay at the office, and so of course she was the one who took the call at 6:40 that evening, from a number she did not recognize, a man's voice, easy and unhurried in a way that made her skin crawl before he even said his name. "You must be the secretary," he said. "Ray Farrell. Marco's told you about me, I'm sure. Nothing flattering." "I don't know who you are," she said, which was a lie, and they both seemed to understand that it was a lie, because he laughed, low and satisfied. "Sure you do. Listen, sweetheart, I don't want trouble with you. I want to know his Tuesday schedule. That's it. Small thing. Nobody has to know where it came from." "I'm hanging up now." "You should think about it," Farrell said, unbothered. "Marco Vitali doesn't keep people who stop being useful to him. You've got maybe another season in that job before he finds a reason to replace you. I'm offering you a better trade." She hung up. Her hands were shaking, which infuriated her more than the call itself had, and she sat at her desk for a full minute breathing through the fear before she picked up her own phone and called Marco directly, something she had never once done outside of work hours. He answered on the second ring, and she could hear the low murmur of the restaurant behind him, glass and quiet conversation, the specific hush of men who did not raise their voices because they had never needed to. "Farrell called me," she said, and told him everything, word for word, while he listened without interrupting, and when she finished, there was a silence on the line long enough that she checked to see if the call had dropped. "You did the right thing," he said finally, "calling me, not the phone company you called instead." "I hung up on him." "I heard." Marco. She had never used his first name to his face before, and it felt strange and necessary in equal measure. "He said you'd replace me eventually, that I have a season left." "He is wrong," Marco said, with a flatness that suggested the wrongness of it was not up for debate, and something about the certainty in his voice settled her more than any reassurance could have. "Stay where you are. Lock the office. Dominic is 3 minutes out." She locked the office. She sat with her back against the wall opposite the elevator, the way he had once shown her, without explaining why, and waited. And when Dominic arrived 12 minutes later, jaw tight, gun visible beneath his jacket in a way it never usually was, she understood that whatever had happened between the phone call and this moment had escalated the entire situation past anything either of them could pretend was routine. Marco came to her apartment that night. He had never been there before, did not ask permission, simply arrived with Dominic trailing 2 steps behind, and told her, standing in her small living room in a suit that looked absurdly out of place among her mismatched furniture, that Farrell had crossed a line he could not uncross by contacting her directly, and that from this point on, she was under his protection, whether she wanted the word or not. "I didn't ask for your protection," she said, though her voice had less fight in it than she intended. "I know," he said. "I am giving it anyway." "That's not how consent works, Marco." Something flickered across his face, not anger, something closer to being caught, and he was quiet for a moment before he answered. "You are right," he said. "Ask me to leave, and I will leave. Ask me to stop, and I will stop." She did not ask him to leave. She stood there in her small apartment with a man who had just admitted, in his own careful way, that he had been wrong, an admission she suspected he had not made to another living person in years, and something in her chest cracked open that she had been holding shut since the day she took this job. "Why me?" she asked. "Why does this matter to you? I'm your secretary. You could replace me with someone who doesn't come with all of this." He crossed the small distance between them, slow, deliberate, giving her every opportunity to step back, and she did not take it. "Because you did not run," he said. "The night Tommy died, I told you the truth, and you did not run. Farrell offered you an easy trade tonight, and you hung up on him. Everyone in my life who is close to me because they need something from me. You have never once needed anything from me that a paycheck would not cover." "That's not entirely true anymore," she said, and the words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. He reached up and touched her jaw, the first time he had touched her at all in 8 months, his hand rough in a way that did not match the elegance of his suits, and she let him, let herself lean into it, and for a long moment the apartment held nothing but the sound of both of them breathing. "This is not safe," he said quietly, "being close to me. I want you to understand that before anything else happens." "I've worked for you for 8 months, she said. "I stopped being safe a long time ago. I'd rather be unsafe standing next to you than unsafe alone." He kissed her then, careful at first, like he expected her to change her mind, and when she did not, when her hands came up to the front of his shirt and pulled him closer, something in him seemed to unlock that had been shut for longer than the 11 years since his brother's photograph had gone up on that credenza. It was not gentle exactly. It was certain. He kissed her like a man who had made a decision and intended to stand behind it, and when he finally pulled back, his forehead against hers, he said her name again, low, like it belonged to him now in a way it had not before, and she did not correct him. They both understood, without saying it aloud, that Farrell was not finished. That understanding hung over the following morning, when Marco left before dawn to meet with 2 of his capos, leaving Dominic posted outside her building, with instructions that made the older man's mouth tighten in a way that suggested he did not love being assigned to babysit the boss's secretary, but would do it without complaint regardless. Josephine went to the office that day because staying home felt worse than the alternative, and because she had files to finish and a stubborn refusal to let one phone call rearrange her entire life. She was 3 hours into the workday when Renata called up from the lobby, her voice tight in a way that made Josephine's stomach drop before a single word registered. "There's a man down here asking for you by name," Renata said. "Says he's a courier." "He's not a courier, Josie. I know every courier who works this building, and I've never seen this guy." Josephine's mind went instantly to Marco's instructions from 4 days earlier, the chair angled away from the blind spot, the driver, the locked doors, and she understood in a rush of cold clarity that none of it had been paranoia. She told Renata to stall him, to say the package needed a signature from building security, anything, and then she called Marco's private line with hands that had gone steady in the specific way they always did once fear turned into action instead of standing still inside her. He did not pick up. She tried Dominic next, who answered on the first ring, already moving, his voice clipped with the particular calm of a man executing a plan he had rehearsed. "Stay in the office. Lock the door. I am 4 minutes out." 4 minutes felt like an hour. Josephine locked the office door and then, instead of sitting still and waiting the way every instinct told her a frightened person should, she did the thing Marco's rules had never accounted for. She pulled up the building's internal camera feed, the one she had access to as his secretary and had never once used for anything beyond checking whether a meeting had ended, and watched the lobby in real time as a man in a delivery uniform that did not quite fit right argued with Renata at the front desk. She recognized something in the way he stood, weight forward, eyes scanning past Renata toward the elevator bank instead of at the woman actually speaking to him, and she understood with total certainty that whoever he was not here to deliver a package. She picked up the office phone and did the one thing she was fairly certain no one expected her to do. She called building security directly and reported an unauthorized individual attempting entry under false pretenses, gave a physical description precise enough that the guard on duty repeated it back to confirm, and stayed on the line until she watched, on the small monitor, 2 security officers intercept the man before he ever reached the elevator. By the time Dominic arrived, the situation in the lobby had already resolved itself into an argument between building security and a man now visibly agitated at having been stopped, and Josephine met Dominic at the elevator bank with her heart still hammering and a strange, fierce satisfaction underneath the fear. "You called it in yourself," Dominic said, something like respect moving across his face. "Before I even got here." "I wasn't going to sit behind a locked door and hope," she said. Marco arrived 20 minutes later, having abandoned whatever meeting he had been in, and found her in his office, not shaking, not needing to be held together, sitting very straight in the chair across from his desk with the security footage already pulled up on her laptop to show him. He watched the footage twice in silence, his jaw working, and when he finally looked up at her, the expression on his face was not the relief she expected. It was something closer to fury, though not, she understood after a moment, fury at her. "He got past the side entrance protocol," Marco said. "Someone gave him building information. That means Farrell has someone inside, feeding him more than DeSalvo ever did." "Then find them," Josephine said. "I'm not going to hide in my apartment while you figure it out. I did fine today." "You should not have had to," he said, and something in his voice cracked slightly around the edges, an admission of guilt he clearly was not accustomed to voicing. "This is what I meant. This is what closeness to me costs." "I know what it costs," she said, standing, crossing to stand in front of him. "I watched the man they carried out of DeSalvo's car in the news footage yesterday, and I still came to work this morning. I'm not naive about what you are, Marco. I decided anyway." He kissed her again in that office, in the middle of the day, with the door unlocked and anyone able to walk in, and it was less careful than the night before, more certain, both of them aware that whatever this was between them had stopped being deniable the moment she watched that lobby feed instead of hiding from it. The break came 2 days later, and it came from an unexpected place. Renata, still shaken from the courier incident, mentioned in passing to Josephine that the building's new maintenance contractor, a man who had started 6 weeks earlier and had unusual access to service corridors on every floor, had been asking Renata odd questions about executive schedules under the guise of small talk. Josephine relayed this to Marco within the hour, and by that evening, the maintenance contractor, a soft-spoken man named Peter Hale, had been quietly detained by 2 of Marco's men and had, under questioning, Josephine was not present for and did not ask about, confirmed that Ray Farrell had been paying him for building access information for 3 weeks. What happened to Peter Hale after that was not something Marco discussed with her, and she did not ask. She understood, with the same clear-eyed acceptance she had brought to every part of this relationship, that there were parts of his world that would remain closed to her, and that choosing him meant choosing not to look behind every door. It was, she thought, a kind of morally gray ground she had never expected to occupy, and she stood on it with her eyes open. Farrell, cut off from his inside information and increasingly desperate, made his final move 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening when Josephine was leaving the building later than usual, alone, having told Dominic he did not need to wait since Marco had personally arranged to drive her home himself that night. It was, in retrospect, exactly the gap Farrell had been waiting for, and Josephine would later understand that Farrell's men had been watching the pattern of her days closely enough to know that Tuesday nights, with Marco occupied by a standing call to his mother that he never missed, were the one predictable window in her week. 2 men intercepted her in the parking structure 2 blocks from the office, the same structure where Tommy DeSalvo had been found dead weeks earlier, and Josephine understood in the half-second before they reached her that this was not a robbery and not a warning. This was Farrell, out of patience, deciding to take the leverage he could not buy. She did not freeze. She had spent 4 months in this world now, had watched Marco move through danger like it was a language, and some of that language had settled into her without her fully realizing it. She threw the contents of her bag, keys, phone, a heavy stapler she had brought home to fix, directly at the nearer man's face, and used the half-second of confusion to run, not toward her car, which was exactly where they would expect her to run, but toward the stairwell, screaming loud enough that the sound bounced off concrete on every level. She made it 4 flights before the second man caught her arm, wrenching her back hard enough that pain flared white across her shoulder, and she did the only thing left available to her, drove her elbow backward into his throat with everything she had, a move she had learned in a self-defense class years ago and never once used, and heard him choke and stagger back long enough for her to keep moving. Marco found her 11 minutes later, having gotten Dominic's frantic call the moment the stairwell alarm tripped, taking the concrete steps 2 at a time with a gun already in his hand and an expression on his face that she would remember for the rest of her life. Not the careful stillness she had learned to read as his default, but something raw and unguarded and terrified in a way she had never seen on him before. He found her on the 3rd-floor landing, breathing hard, blood on her elbow where she had scraped it against the wall, but standing, upright, having put enough distance between herself and both men that they had apparently given up the chase rather than risk being caught in an enclosed stairwell. He crossed the last few feet between them and pulled her against him so hard it nearly knocked the breath back out of her, and she felt him shaking, actually shaking, this man who never lost his stillness. "You are not permitted to do that again," he said against her hair, his voice rough in a way she had never heard. "I got away," she said. "I'm okay, Marco." "You are not okay. You are bleeding." "I'm fine," she said, and meant it, and did not let him fuss over the scrape on her arm, because she understood instinctively that turning this moment into a wound to be tended would shrink it into something smaller than what it actually was, which was proof, undeniable now, that she was not a woman who needed rescuing so much as a woman who had rescued herself and simply needed him to arrive after. Farrell's men were identified within the hour through the parking structure's cameras, and what followed over the next 2 days happened mostly outside Josephine's direct knowledge. A series of quiet, decisive moves within Marco's organization that resulted, she gathered from the tension easing out of Dominic's shoulders and the extra security presence disappearing from the building's ground floor, in Ray Farrell no longer being a problem anyone needed to plan around. She did not ask for details. She understood, with the same clarity she had brought to every choice in the last 2 weeks, that this was the cost of the world she had chosen to stand in, and she chose not to look away from it, only to not go looking for it either. Marco came to her apartment again on the 3rd night after the parking structure, without Dominic this time, without the careful distance he had maintained even after their first kiss, and stood in her small living room looking, for the first time since she had known him, uncertain. "I have never said this to anyone since my brother," he said, and stopped, and started again. "I do not know how to be careful with this. I have spent 11 years making certain nothing mattered enough to be used against me. You matter. I do not know how to hold that and still be the man my family requires me to be." "I'm not asking you to be careful with me," she said. "I'm asking you to be honest with me. That's different. I nearly lost you in that stairwell." "You didn't," she said, closing the distance between them herself this time. "I got myself out, and then you came. Both things are true, Marco. I need you to understand that I am not something you protect from a distance. I am someone who stands next to you." He looked at her for a long moment, something settling in his face that she recognized now as the closest thing to peace she had ever seen cross it, and when he spoke again his voice had lost the roughness of uncertainty. "Then stand next to me," he said, "not behind me, not because you are protected, because you chose it." "I already did," she said. "Weeks ago. You just weren't paying attention yet." He almost smiled at that, the first real one she had ever seen from him, small and slightly crooked, and gone almost as quickly as it arrived. But she had seen it, and she understood that she was one of perhaps 3 people alive who had. 6 weeks later, the office had settled into a new rhythm that no one commented on directly, but that everyone, from Renata at the front desk to Dominic at the wheel of the car, seemed to understand without being told. Josephine still managed Marco's calendar, still kept the office running the way she had for 8 months before any of this began, but she no longer sat in the chair angled away from the hallway out of fear. She sat there because it was simply where she preferred to sit, and because on the evenings when the floor emptied out and the building went quiet around them, Marco Vitale no longer pretended he had a reason to linger by her desk. He simply stayed. She kept the purple dress. She wore it again 3 weeks after the warning that had started everything. On an evening Marco took her to dinner somewhere with white tablecloths, and men in the corners who nodded to him with a specific kind of respect she had learned to recognize. And when she walked in wearing it, he looked at her the way he had that very first day. Except this time there was no warning in it, only the particular stillness of a man who had stopped fighting the thing he wanted. "You remember what I said about that dress?" he murmured, pulling her chair out for her. "I remember," she said. "You told me not to wear it again." "I was wrong," he said simply, and there it was again, that rare admission, and she understood by now that when Marco Vitale said he was wrong, the room genuinely did change around it. "Wear it as often as you like. Just know that every time you do, I am going to be thinking about how close I came to losing the only thing in this life I did not earn through violence." She reached across the table and took his hand, the one with the old scarred knuckle, and did not say anything else, because some things did not need to be said twice, only understood. And she understood. Sitting there in a dress she had once bought for a wedding that never happened, that she had built a different kind of life instead, one she had chosen with her eyes fully open, danger and all. If you found yourself holding your breath through that stairwell, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me which moment got you, because I read every single one.